Hello, everyone. I believe we were having some difficulty with everyone not being able to hear us. Can you hear us now? I think Mark and, okay. So we did receive some that you are able to hear. So we'll go back a couple of slides since you weren't able to hear us. Thank you, everyone. Webinar housekeeping. Okay, so hopefully, audio troubleshooting. Hopefully you guys are able to hear us now. I don't know if everyone was able to hear before, so I'll just go through this one more time real quick. Just for audio troubleshooting, if you're having difficulty or if it seems far away, it might be better to call in via the telephone rather than your speakers on your computer. And you'll just have to follow the instructions and enter your audio PIN. You can see the image there on your screen on the right is what it should look like. So just use the audio troubleshooting in the GoToWebinar. Again, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat box or let us know if you're having trouble hearing, or if you're not seeing our screen, please let us know in that chat box. We will have options to answer questions throughout the webinar, so when we have these Q&A slides, you can feel free to raise your hand, and we will call on you and unmute your line if you're calling in or have a microphone via your computer. We can answer those questions as we go along. Just please limit it to one question at a time. You can feel free to put other questions in the chat box as we go along. We'll make sure we get to all of those. And we can always answer more questions after the webinar as well. All right, so some training materials today. I had emailed out most of the materials on Monday via email to everybody. They are also now available at allchicago.org. So you can just go to the Chicago Alliance page and then go to the COC funded projects page. And everything should be listed in one section there for you. So you'll see the instruction manual, the agency and project components in PDF, the links to the online versions, and we'll also be posting these PowerPoint slides today after the webinar. And we are currently recording this webinar as well, so that will be posted shortly after. So probably by the end of the day, if not tomorrow. All right, so our training objectives today are to ensure that all agencies know and understand, one, what the evaluation instrument is. Hopefully you're familiar with it. This is the advanced training. And two, how it is used to determine funding priorities for Chicago. And then three, how to successfully submit the evaluation instrument and on time. So we will go over some submission tips and then go over some details of the instrument itself as well and make sure you guys have all the information. All right, so some common terms and acronyms. Since this is the advanced webinar training, hopefully some of you are familiar with some of these terms, so I won't go into too much detail with these. Obviously, you should be familiar with the HARTH Act, the Homeless Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing Act, which sort of governs this COC program work. The COC stands for Continuum of Care, and then the COC program is a combination under the HARTH Act. The Supportive Housing Program and the Shelter Plus Care Program were combined to form the COC program. One thing I did want to make note of is that Shelter Plus Care is sometimes now referred to as long-term rental assistance, or LTRA. So if you see that acronym, we are referring to Shelter Plus Care. So those will be used interchangeably. That's sort of a new term that we're using. So for you that have Shelter Plus Care projects, keep that in mind, that I might refer to that as long-term rental assistance. All right, so these are the HUD program model types. They might differ from the Chicago program model types, which Lauren will cover a little bit later. Just make sure that you're familiar that these are the HUD program model types. You have permanent housing, transitional housing, supportive service only, safe haven, and emergency shelter. A few more common terms and acronyms. These are sometimes a little confusing, so I will go through these. First, you have the APR, which stands for Annual Performance Report, and that is the one that you submit to HUD, a HUD reporting tool required to be submitted through eSNAPS within 90 days after your project grant year ending. So that is not the same as the 625 HUD COC APR, which is the second one on here. That is a report pulled from HMIS. To provide the information that you need to submit that annual performance report to HUD. So The APR, when we refer to that just as APR, that means the one that you submit in eSNAP. When we refer to the 625, that's the report that you pull from HMIS, which stands for Homeless Management Information System. Hopefully you're familiar with that. ART, when we say ART, that means the Advanced Reporting Tool within HMIS, which is basically the software used to pull those reports. And then you might hear ATA as well, and that just stands for Agency Technical Administrator, who is sort of our liaison between between the HMIS team here and all of your agencies. So you should have one, sometimes two ATAs, depending on the size of your organization. It's a good person to be familiar with. So if you're not sure who your current Agency Technical Administrator is, you should contact the HMIS Help Desk and you can find out. You'll need them to run your reports for you.
So this is Lauren, and I just want to give some context to exactly what the evaluation instrument is and how it came about. The Interim Board of Directors, previously known as the Chicago Planning Council on Homelessness due to charter implementation, establishes the policies and principles as well as priorities for NOFA funding, the NOFA funding process, and they also select the collaborative applicant, which currently is the Chicago Alliance to End Homelessness. Two subcommittees of the interim board further develop the local NOFA competition. The application process and the evaluation instrument is developed and approved by the HUD-McKinney-Vento Committee, also known as HMV, and the ranking policies are constructed by the HARTH Funding Opportunities Task Group. The evaluation instrument point system is used to competitively rank projects on performance and their structure. It's important to remember that the score of a project is not the sole indicator of if the project will or will not be funded. So the evaluation instrument is based on the HUD-HARTH Act, and it emphasizes performance and community impact within the Chicago Continuum of Care. Chicago's Plan 2.0 is the city's strategy for preventing and ending homelessness. Has 7 strategic priorities. It's crisis response system, access to stable and affordable housing, youth homelessness, employment, advocacy, and civic engagement, cross-systems integration, and capacity building. All of those are referenced and reflected as well as scored in the evaluation instrument. Please note that the HUD application has not yet been released, but we're anticipating that to happen in spring of 2015. So if you participated in the evaluation instrument last year for 2014, I just want to touch on that there are some differences this year. There's a previously unscored question from last year's evaluation instrument tool that is now scored in 2015. If your housing project participates in the Central Referral System, also known as CRIS, please note that this question will only be asked for permanent supportive housing providers, and it is now scored. There are 2 questions that have minor adjustments from the 2014 evaluation instrument, and they're found in the project performance and consumer outcomes section. Permanent housing for youth is now asking to review consumers who were permanently housed at the 6-month follow-up, so that's looking at a different month than before. And the other question is required of all housing projects, and it asks what is the average overall income change for leavers. So we kind of heard some feedback from last year of questions that maybe were needed to be reworded or were actually needed to be changed to drill down on really what we were looking at. So those changes have been made. So the calculation worksheet that Amanda mentioned that will be available with the evaluation instrument indicates a couple of formula adjustments. The main one being that deceased clients are moved from some of those calculations. So just be sure that you not only read the instruction manual, but just pay special attention to those calculations, and some of them have been changed. 2 HMIS questions that were previously unscored have been moved to the certification checklist. And as you review the instruction manual, you'll see that the HMIS ART report dates now are for January 1st, 2014 through December 31st, 2014. If your project is completing a question that requires comparison to the previous year's data, you'll use the 2013 calendar year, which is January 1st, 2013 through December 31st, 2013. and Amanda will discuss this in more detail later on in the webinar. So here you'll see a breakdown of all the available points per section of the evaluation tools. It's scored based on 100 points, but some questions are tossed out for particular projects, such as domestic violence. HMIS has 3 points reduced from last year because the data quality process is only 3 quarters rather than 4 quarters for this time frame. The consumer focus was increased by 1 point. Previously, an unscored question regarding if an agency presently has a consumer who is homeless or was homeless in the past 10 years is on the board of directors or another policy-making entity. Please note that this question differs from the threshold question regarding consumer representation. All projects need to complete and submit an evaluation instrument tool. Projects that were exempt, such as HMIS, have already been notified. All shelter plus care projects need to submit regardless of if their project is up for renewal. As always, if an agency is not interested in renewing their COC grant, please contact the Chicago Alliance as soon as possible so we can move forward. Agencies that are interested in changing their program component type must adhere to the new project process, which will be discussed later on in this presentation. So now that we kind of discussed the skeleton of exactly what the evaluation instrument is, I just want to pause to see if there's any questions based just on the background of some of the changes as well as how the evaluation instrument came to be. So if you want, please click on the raise hand button to be called on. You will then be unmuted and you can ask your question. Again, just please limit it to 1 question for now. You can always use the chat option in the box as well.
And again, this is Amanda. We will be going through some of this in a lot more detail as we go through the webinar. So like the reporting dates and things like that, we will be talking about in more detail. That was just kind of a brief overview of some of that information. Liz, do we have any questions coming in? Anyone raising their hand?
It doesn't seem like we have anybody asking any questions at the moment.
Okay, great. Then I will hand it off to Amanda to discuss in more details about actually submitting the evaluation tools.
Okay, so a little bit more detail about the survey tool itself and some tips for submission. So we will be using the same format as last year, submission via surveygizmo.com, which was again approved by the HMB committee to use again. It was successful last year. We have tried to incorporate some of the feedback we received last evaluation cycle, and hopefully we have addressed some of the issues and concerns from last year. I will talk about some of these items later on in the webinar when we get to submission tips as well. I do want to note that paper submissions, again, will not be accepted this year. If you would like to review the full submission policies, which I recommend, you can reference the instruction manual at the end of that document. You will see all of the submission policies. Just know that online submission is the only accepted method of submission, so it's not optional. You guys should have received some links in the email that I sent out on Monday. They are also available on our website. You will see again that we have one Survey Gizmo survey for the agency component, which you'll need to submit 1 per agency. And then there's a separate survey with a separate link for the project component. So they're not under the same link. They're not connected. You'll have to complete 1 per agency for the agency component, and then the project component, you'll have to complete 1 for each project that is COC funded. All right, so the agency component breakdown, again, it's 1 per agency, and it covers information that pertains to the agency as a whole. So the sections include first the threshold section. These questions must be answered affirmatively when applicable in order to be considered for renewal funding. So they are a minimum threshold. If you can't answer them affirmatively, you will be prompted to submit an explanatory letter just explaining why you are not able to meet that threshold at this time, and that those letters are reviewed by the appeals committee. The next section under the agency component is the financial review section, so that will look exactly the same as last time. And it looks at the financial stability of the agency. So although these are not threshold questions, If you are not able to answer yes to all these questions, you will again be prompted for an explanatory letter. So they're not threshold, but we do want an explanation if you're not able to meet one of these requirements. Next, you'll see the agency certification checklist, which, as mentioned previously, would minimize the documentation that was submitted in previous years. It'll look just the same as it did last year. So there are yes or no questions that you'll simply certify that you have the documentation for. And then if chosen for a site visit, which hopefully will be coming up this year, then we will review those documents at that time. So following that, you'll have the agency governance section. And that covers, for example, committee participation and things of that nature. You'll notice here that the HMIS section of the agency component has been removed. And as Lauren mentioned, those 2 questions were unscored last year. And we just felt that those were better placed in the checklist. So that HMIS section has been removed. It will be seen in the project component still. And then finally, you'll see the consumer focus and representation section, which covers topics such as avenues for consumer feedback within your agency. And again, you'll submit just one agency component only. All right, so now the project component, again, will be one for each COC-funded project. Again, you'll have that threshold section, same as the agency component. You'll have to answer affirmatively or submit a letter. And then the project certification checklist, again, will look just the same as it did before. You'll just answer the yes or no as to whether you have those documents. The project operations section then covers topics such as expenditure of funds. And then the HMIS section will look pretty similar to last time. We'll cover the changes to that. You'll see it covers participation in data quality processes and overall data quality for your project, each project individually. And then the leading practices section contains questions related to practices and approaches that are priorities for our city, such as housing first. And then, of course, you have the project performance and consumer outcomes section, which will utilize that calculations worksheet we talked about and the 625 report pulled from HMIS in order to calculate your performance. And lastly, you'll have the system priorities section, which emphasizes topics such as chronic homeless or special populations. You'll see some minor changes, like we've added veterans to the special populations question. So there are minor changes throughout, but most of the questions remain the same. And again, you'll submit one for each project seeking renewal funding that was operating in 2014, or if you're a shelter plus care project, you'll submit one for each. Okay, I'll now be going over just a little bit more detail about how the submissions will be structured and a few other tips to help with submitting via the online format. Okay. So as I said, the links to the online surveys are already available on our website, and were emailed out to the contacts at each agency or project as well. Anyone will be able to access these links, so there's no need to create a username or password, nothing like that. It'll be similar to last year. We do recommend that you review the provided PDF format of the survey before going into online survey, as you'll not be able to navigate or skip around the sections. Unfortunately, we are not able to change that as a setting. I know that was some feedback from last year, but we are not able to do that on our end. So unfortunately, you'll have to review the PDF and get all the information before going into the survey. It really would be beneficial to just retrieve everything first and then go in, rather than entering incorrect attachments or information that you might forget to change later. It would just be better to avoid any of the loss of points for incorrect answers and responses. So it might be better just to gather all the information and then move forward into the online survey format as you gather that information. You'll again, just as last year, be able to save and continue for later. So if you begin entering information and realize that you need something else for a question, or if you want to do it section by section and save to continue later, there will be that big orange arrow pointing up to the top of the screen where you can click here to save and continue later. It will prompt you to enter your email address, and link to a partial survey will be sent to you. You can then click that link and continue adding or editing information at any time. And I just want to be clear that you only need to do this one time, so you'll just click on it right away, submit your email address, and you'll get a link. You don't have to do it each time you go into it. It'll remain that same link to your same survey each time. I would just, as a tip, we had some feedback last year that it was difficult to keep track of links for multiple projects. So what I would recommend is when you get that email, make sure you get it before you leave the screen. But when you get that email, make sure that you save it to your computer with the project name as the title of the document, so that you can easily keep track of which link is for which project. If you have multiple, that might be easier. And again, your responses will save each time you move forward or backward in the survey, so you don't need to enter your email address each time to continue. You'll just need to do that the one time, and it'll continue to save under that same link. So just some technical information regarding uploading attachments. You will be uploading those attachments directly within the survey. It'll look just as last year. Just keep in mind that it is a two-step process. So you'll need to click where it says Browse to find the file on your computer. And then you'll have to click here to upload file second. So just browsing and selecting it does not upload it. You have to click here to upload file. And then once it's complete, you'll see that a gray bar, as you see on your screen here, will appear, and that means the file has been uploaded. So until you see that, your file has not been uploaded. Just make sure you find that gray bar there. Otherwise, your file has not been completely attached. And then if you needed to remove it and submit a different document or an updated document, you can always just hit that red X on the right of the gray bar and complete the process all over again. I do want to mention that the file size limits are usually indicated in the question. I know that was another item from last year that some had issues with. We tried to increase those, but the file size limits we have in there now are pretty generous. So if your file is larger than the file size limit, you'll have to consult the instruction manual. We do have some information on compressing files and making sure you're saving it in the correct format, because that was a concern from last year. But the file size limit should be much larger than you'll need. So hopefully we don't have too much issue with that or technical difficulty, but let us know if you do. And again, just as last year, for all those attachments, we'll have naming conventions that are indicated in the question itself. So it will say save file as, and then, for example, agency name _ DV threshold. That's just so we can easily keep track of which attachments are which and can save them all on our end as the same name. So try to use those, and all those naming conventions are also listed, I believe, in the frequently asked questions already. So if you need just a complete list of them, they're already there. All right, so once you've completed all sections and completed all narratives and attachment uploads, you can then navigate to the final submission page. You'll see that big warning sign. That's how you know you're on the final page. I do recommend that you click the link to download a PDF of your response. It'll give you that option. I cannot stress enough that you really should review each answer to be sure all parts of a question are completed and that all narratives and attachments have been included, and not just check to see that something has been attached, but actually click on all the links, open up your attachments, make sure they're the correct documents. That was a concern from last year and an issue we had. And so just make sure that you're not just checking to see something has been uploaded, but that it is the actual correct document that you need, and that it's full and complete, and that all parts of a question have been completed. So you do have the option to review that before you hit that final submit button. If you do submit and then you realize that you need to make a change or update something, you do have to resubmit an entire component with everything included. So we won't be able to sort of release that other one back to you. You will have to start again and just enter all information from the beginning. And then let us know that you have submitted a corrected submission, and we'll take the last one that you submit as the final submission. For the rest of the submission policies, just check with the instruction manual. So once you submit, click that final submit button, you'll actually get a confirmation email. Just note that it's delivered to the primary contact, so the person that you indicate as the primary contact is the person that's going to get the confirmation email. So if that's not you, then you'll have to check with that person to make sure that they've received it. So it won't go necessarily to you, but it'll go to that person that you indicated as the primary contact. And I would recommend that you save this confirmation email to your computer as well. It will contain, you'll see in the subject line there, it will contain a PDF copy as well. So just keep these on file for yourself so that you know which ones you've submitted, and have a PDF copy in there as well. Okay. So just to sum up a little bit, again, utilize that PDF format ahead of time before going into the survey. You won't really be able to get very far if you don't have all the information you need. You should have only one person designated to submit your agency and project components, but if you need, multiple people are able to access the survey. So if you're saving that link and then sharing it with others, just make sure you know who's accessing it at any given time. Because if two people are in it at the same time, it might not save both of your responses. So it would be best to just gather all that information from the necessary people beforehand, and then have sort of one person designated who's responsible for the online submission. It might not always work that way for your agency, but that's just the process that we're kind of recommending as a best practice. You're definitely encouraged to submit prior to the deadline and ahead of time if you're able to. I know it's a shorter time frame that you have to complete it. But just to avoid any technical difficulties that happen on the last day at the last minute, we'll try to address those with you, but try to submit a little bit early, at least a day or two, so that if there is an issue, we can help you address it. And then we can't emphasize enough, if you read the instruction manual for the detailed information on specific questions, we have made a lot of edits to the instruction manual this year as well, so make sure you review that before you contact us for questions. There's also the frequently asked questions document, which we've already posted, and it's sort of a Google Doc that we'll continue to update as we get those in. But make sure you check those first before contacting us to see if your question might already be answered. Otherwise, feel free to contact Alliance staff. All right, so when's the due date? Right here, 5 p.m. on February 20th, 2015. No later than 5 p.m., so no late submissions will be accepted. Make note of that deadline. And be sure to review those submission policies again in the instruction manual. They have been updated slightly. The technical deficiencies policy that was previously removed has been added back in. So this policy outlines the procedure for incorrect or missing attachments and any penalties associated. So I recommend reviewing this in full and being aware of the policy for missing attachments. Okay, so we have set aside some question and answer time, so you can feel free to raise your hand if you have a question and want to just say that question over the phone or your speakers, or you can feel free to put it in the chat box. I don't know what questions we're getting in. We'll check on that. Are we getting any?
So we have received 2 questions. One question was, for projects that operate by units, will the 80% capacity be allowed? Will you be able to submit a letter explaining why that 80% was not met? And yes, you will be requested to submit an explanation letter explaining why your project was not meeting the 80% capacity. There was also a question for the attachments. It appears, and as Amanda mentioned, last year there were troubles with uploading the documents due to the file size. So as Amanda mentioned, that file size has been increased, but if you are still having issues, we do highly recommend that you visit the instruction manual to see how you can compress your file.
Yeah, I do want to just emphasize that the file size limits really should accommodate, really large 100-page PDF documents. So if yours is not meeting one of those limits, then chances are it's saved in a format that's creating a larger file for you. So PDF can be a text file or an image file. Image files are considerably larger. So just check your scanner or your copy settings or your settings on your computer when you're saving something. They really are quite generous, so you really shouldn't even come close to those file size limits. So just try to compress the document if you can. You can always contact us and we can assist you with that.
Okay, we also got another question on where you can access the instruction manual, which is a great question. As Amanda mentioned, those have been sent out via email, but they are also available on our website. So if you go to allchicago.org and go to the Chicago Alliance section for the COC funded projects, you should be able to scroll down and you'll see all the links that we have been discussing. Okay, it doesn't seem like we have any more additional questions or raising a hand. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren to continue. And if you have any other questions, feel free to use the chat box.
So once everybody turns in the evaluation instrument, the Chicago Alliance CUC Program Department, so me, Amanda, and Liz, will review over 180 submitted applications. Staff will then issue preliminary scores to agencies based on the project applications. Preliminary scores are tentatively scheduled for March 6th. Please be aware that may change, and we will communicate any changes in dates. Agencies will have the opportunity to review their scorecards for each project. If there is any disparity in the way a question was scored, the agency can submit an appeal for further review. So the appeals process is led by a subcommittee of the Interim Board of Directors, previously known as the Chicago Planning Council. It's important to note that agencies will only have 1 week to submit an appeal based on their original scorecards. So like Amanda said, this is also shorter than last year. The appeals process will be in Survey Gizmo, and details about this process will be included with your preliminary scorecards. All decisions from the appeal process committee are final. The subcommittee will issue final scores. These are going to incorporate any points given to an agency as the result of an approved appeal. Once the adjustments are made to the scores, a final scorecard will then be emailed to all agencies for their project. This is tentatively set for March 30th. Again, this is also subject to change. Scores will be used as one of the factors for the Planning Council's ranking policies, but again, is not the sole factor for if a project will be funded. I want to talk just a little bit about the program models. So Chicago has developed the Chicago Program Models chart, which encompasses the HUD component type. On the screen, you'll see the HUD component type and the Chicago Program Models type. Most of the HUD and Chicago types are the same, but there are a few differences. For example, since interim housing is specific just to Chicago as a Chicago model type and not a HUD component type, it sometimes leads to confusion when completing various forms. For the evaluation instrument, we are going to be utilizing the Chicago terms, so you'll be able to identify as interim housing project if you have one. You might be aware that the program models chart was recently updated and approved by the Interim Board of Directors, also known as Planning Council. However, please note that for this process, we are only utilizing the 2010 program models chart. So we're using the same chart that has been used last year and in years before. We will not be using the revised program models chart for the 2015 evaluation instrument.
Okay, so now it's Amanda again. You'll hear a lot from me today, sorry. So I'll just go into a little more detail regarding the attachments that need to be required. Those seem to be somewhat of a confusing topic, usually from year to year, so I want to make sure we get all the details now. So for the agency component, you'll need to submit a completed audit report for the threshold section. And what we're looking for here is a report from the auditor, which includes financial statements, and there's usually a letter stating the opinion of the auditor. So this may not look the same for all agencies depending on the auditor, but just ensure that financial statements are included and that an opinion of the auditor is mentioned somewhere in the document. So sometimes we'll just get a letter and sometimes we'll just get part of the audit. So we really do need the financial statements and something that says the opinion of the audit somewhere in there. A133 requires that entities that expend $500,000 or more a year in federal awards to have a single or program-specific audit conducted. So basically, we're looking for compliance with this requirement for any projects that have over $500,000 in funding from federal awards. You'll also need to submit an IRS Form 990 and Form 941. Please just ensure these are federal IRS tax forms and not state documents. I think that happened last year for a few agencies, so just make sure they're federal IRS forms 990 and 941 and not some state documents or local state tax documents. Just make sure they're federal documents. And lastly, you'll need to submit for the agency component the consumer rights document for agencies. So just ensure that this document addresses and clearly describes all of the items outlined in that associated question. So it'll be the same question as last year. And you'll see that there's 4 or 5 items that need to be in that consumer rights document to get all points. So just make sure you check it to make sure that all those items are covered. It is an all or nothing points for that. And just make sure the full consumer rights document is uploaded and not just sort of a summary. All right. In the project component, you also have just a few attachments. You'll need to submit a couple of documents that allow us to verify your threshold requirements. So one of the most recently submitted APR, so as mentioned previously, this is what your project submits to HUD through eSNAPs. And just make sure that it is the most recently submitted based on your grant year. We got a few that were a couple of years older, so we need to have the most recent APR. And then you'll need to submit the 625 HUD COC APR report from HMIS, and this must be in Excel format and must be for the dates outlined. So in order to verify your bed utilization threshold question, we need to have your Excel 625 report for the correct dates in order to verify that bed utilization. So just ensure that the dates are for January 1, 2014 to December 31st, 2014. And that will actually be uploaded with the performance section, so you'll be prompted for these reports based on your program model type. So it won't be uploaded with your threshold, but it'll be uploaded later with the performance, because it is also used to verify your performance calculations. And then lastly, for the HMIS section, you will need to upload the same 625 HUD COC APR, so for the same time frame of January 1, 2014 to December 31st, 2014, but you'll need to save it in PDF and upload it in the HMIS section. The HMIS Help Desk has documentation that outlines very clearly how to save in both PDF and Excel right within ART and HMIS. So all APAs should be able to do this without any concern. You can run the report just once and save it in both formats right there within ART. So you don't have to run it multiple times. You'll again have the match and leverage spreadsheet in the project component. It has been updated slightly for 2015, so please make sure that you're only using the 2015 match and leverage spreadsheet. Please do not submit a 2013 or 2014 match and leverage spreadsheet. You will not get points if it is not the 2015 match and leverage spreadsheet. Enter all information into, there'll be sort of these yellowish fields that you have there. You can see below on the screen. And all of the other fields in blue will auto-calculate. So just be sure you're filling out all of that information fully. For the match and leverage sources, be specific to what the source is. And just make sure that you also indicate the type of source and the value. And then when it asks for an MOU, if there's a column for MOU, you will need to answer yes or no as to whether an MOU is present for that match source. So for in-kind match, an MOU has to be there. And I will only award points if you indicate yes or no for MOU. Last year we had a lot of people that just skipped that column and didn't answer yes or no. We will probably not be as lenient this year. I need to know whether there is an MOU in place. That is a HUD requirement for in-kind match from a third-party source. And then the main difference you'll see in the 2015 match and leverage chart is that there is a box included that will auto-calculate the ratio from the information you enter. So you should enter the ratio, and that it'll be like a gold box that you'll put into your response in the evaluation. So you won't enter the dollar amount. It'll be the ratio that we need in the actual survey gizmo response. For SSO projects only, you'll again use that SSO functionality worksheet. It looks exactly the same as last year, but the scoring has been adjusted slightly. So we don't have enough SSO projects to score via percentiles. So it will be scored as maintained, increased, or did not maintain or increase outcomes. So you'll see a slight difference in the scoring if you're an SSO, but the SSO functionality worksheet will look just the same. And for the project performance and consumer outcomes section, I'll just go over into a little more detail so I'm very clear on which 625s you'll have to submit. So you must submit data from HMIS from the ART report HUD COC APR 625 in Excel format. So all projects will submit that for the 2014 calendar year. You'll be prompted again based on the program model type that you select. And then certain projects that have questions in the section that refer to a comparison to a previous year, we will also need a 2013 625 for you. So that's interim housing, the permanent housing for youth, and permanent housing with short-term supports have questions that compare to a previous year. And normally we would just compare that to a previous evaluation, but since it hasn't been a full year, the HMV committee did decide to compare 2013 calendar to 2014 calendar year. So based on your program model type, you'll be prompted to upload 1 or 2 reports. Just be sure that when you're attaching these reports that the dates are correct, and just make sure that, and you can check that on the last page of the report, just make sure the full report is there. So I can't take just half of the report. I need the full report to be there, including the last page that sort of shows those prompts that you ran the report under. All right. Sorry, it cuts off on the bottom of your screen a little bit. That's all right. We'll send out the PowerPoint slides to the whole thing. So how do percentiles work? I think we all know that there was some confusion over the difference between percentiles and percent ranges last year when the percentiles were reintroduced. So these are not the same, so I wanted to include a brief explanation of percentiles and how they work, which is also included in the scoring guide that we sent out last year, and we've also sent it out this year, so you can find that on our website. So a percentile is a value on a scale of 100 that indicates the percent of a distribution that is equal to or below it. So this can allow for ranking within given values. You can review the example here that I have on the screen, and it's from the scoring guide. So if there are 20 responses, let's say, to a question on percent exit to permanent housing, then the responses provided will determine what the percentiles are. So as it explained here on the screen, in this case, the top 9% of the responses that we have would receive the full point. This thereby establishes the 90th percentile because 90% of the responses are below those scores. So depending on how many responses it is, the top 9 or 10% of the responses usually establish the 90th percentile. You can also see that because 80% of the scores fall below 92%, this establishes the 80th percentile, and so on. So this is a way to rank within the responses you have received. It is similar to scoring for a standardized test or SAT, something like that. Unfortunately, what this means is that you'll not be able to know how many points you were awarded until all of the evaluation instruments and final scores are completed, as percentiles may change following preliminary results or appeals. So hopefully that clears that up. If you have questions about that still, you can feel free to let us know. Just know that they're not the same as percent ranges. So just because your answer is 95% exited to permanent housing does not mean you are automatically getting the full amount of points. It depends on what the other projects have in terms of their percentages. Okay. All right. So as mentioned previously, we'll be using the 625 APR report from HMIS to determine the calculations for the project performance and consumer outcomes section. So you don't have to attach the calculation worksheet. Just make sure you're utilizing that and that you're making note of the updated calculations. We did adjust some of them slightly, so don't use last year's calculation worksheet. Use the most updated one. You'll also see in the footnote on there that deceased clients can now be removed from some calculations, so those will be noted with an asterisk. And then you'll see at the bottom how to calculate who the deceased clients were from year 625.
I just want to review the appendices and what that looks like. In the instruction manual, you'll be able to find the appendices section that contain links to all the documents shown on your screen. We highly encourage you to read the instruction manual prior to contacting the Alliance staff. It's a very useful guide in completing the instrument. The appendices section will contain links on how to run specific reports necessary to answer questions in the evaluation instrument. So this includes the match and leverage spreadsheet, the project performance and consumer outcomes calculation worksheet, instructions on how to run the HMIS ART 625 report and chronic homeless report, the SSO functionality worksheet, as well as an example of the program models chart. If you have any questions regarding the HMIS ART 625 report or the chronic homeless report, please contact your ATA. If If you do not know who the ATA is at your agency, or if your ATA is experiencing difficulties with these reports, please contact the HMIS team at hmis@thechicagoalliance.org.
All right, so do we have some questions coming in or any raised hands?
Yeah. So there's a question for their permanent housing with short-term support project was recently converted to a rapid rehousing in 2014. However, they don't see a rapid rehousing model in the evaluation instrument. Do they still use a permanent housing with short-term support model to answer their questions?
I'll have to look into that and look at when the date was changed. So chances are, since we didn't have a rapid rehousing section, we'll have to look into what would be the most appropriate for that project type.
Okay. There was also another question regarding to the uploading attachments. For those agencies whose financial statements and letters are included in the A133, do they have to submit the A133 twice?
No. So the A133 is an optional upload. So as long as all of that is in the document and uploaded, that should be fine. If it's all in one PDF document, you don't have to submit it twice.
Okay. And then there were questions about the 0625 report. For those program models who are in interim housing, permanent housing for youth, and permanent housing with short-term support, there was just a clarifying question whether those two reports needed to be run. So for the date ranges, if you fall under those program model types, you would have to submit 2 reports to compare that data. So just be sure that your 625 is running with those dates mentioned in the evaluation instrument, and if your program model is one of those 3, to submit 2 reports. And I don't see any hands being raised or any additional questions being asked. But again, if you have some questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type in your question in the chat box.
Okay, as Amanda said, just a reminder that the evaluation instrument, the agency and project components are due by online submission on Friday, February 20th, no later than 5 p.m. Also, as Amanda mentioned, we encourage agencies to submit their evaluation instrument early in case there are any technical difficulties or if any questions arise during that process. So again, just to reiterate some important reminders, late submissions will not be accepted. So again, it's recommended that you submit early, if possible, to avoid attempting submitting very close to the deadline if an issue arises. Projects that fall below 2 standard deviations from the mean or average score will receive technical assistance from the Chicago Alliance staff in order to assist in improving the score for the upcoming evaluation instrument process for the next year. Again, if your agency or project is not seeking renewal for your grant, please contact the Chicago Alliance as soon as possible. If you have any questions about this entire process, feel free to contact the COC Programs Department. Email is the best way to get the quickest response. Our email address is on the screen, but it's cocprograms@allchicago.org. You can also call Amanda, Liz, or myself if you need to speak directly, and all of our extensions are listed on the screen. This will be posted so you can refer to it at a different time. So finally, one last opportunity to kind of ask any questions over stuff that we reviewed, stuff that you might have questions on.
Great. So we did have a couple of questions enter in. So the first one is, in running the 0625 art report, do we make the date range as January 1st, 2014 to December 31st, 2014, or January 1st, 2014 to January 1st, 2015?
Sure, so that's a good question. So whenever your ATA, who is the only person that can run reports for your agency, runs that report, the prompt specifies that you add 1 day to the end date. So the end date is December 31st, 2014, but you will add 1 day to that for the prompt. So it will be running for January 1, 2014 to January 1, 2015 is what it will show in the prompt in order to get the report dates correct. Yes.
Another question was, for the financial part of the agency component, do they have to submit the 2014 audit and the 990?
You'll have to submit your most recently completed audit, so it would be within 9 months of the end of the fiscal year. And yes, the Form 990 is separate from the audit. So yes, you'll have to submit both of those.
We also have another question on how will the site visits affect the scoring. Will they be done before March?
Good question. So the site visits will not actually at this time affect your scoring at all. So the site visit process is not fully fleshed out yet. We do have a committee working on that work to figure out what the site visits will look like. We do anticipate hopefully starting those this year after all of this is completed, so not until April or later. And currently, the committee is not anticipating that it will have any effect on your points for the evaluation. That may happen down the road later on, but currently it has no weight on your actual score since those questions in the checklist are not actually scored. It's just a verifiable sort of visit to check your documents. It'll incorporate a focus group with participants. So it won't be for points at all. It'll just be sort of a stop-in visit to check in and provide any assistance that you need.
All right, and I don't have any more additional questions being popped in, so I will turn it back over to you.
All right. And feel free to provide any other questions you have later on as you're reviewing the information or as you start looking through. You can always contact us. But thank you for joining us today for the webinar. Hopefully it was helpful. And again, the recording will be posted if you missed any of it. The deadline, as a final reminder,